I never thought babysitting would teach me more about life than any journalism class I'd ever sat through. Back in the summer of 2016, I was 21 and convinced I had the whole world figured out, or at least the parts that mattered. I was living in Denver, scraping by with a part-time cafe job and a full class load at the university. I wasn't just juggling work to pay bills. I had this dream that one day I'd have my own blog, a place where I could put my words and my pictures side by side. Street photography fascinated me, the way a camera could freeze a stranger's unguarded expression or capture a fleeting moment no one else would ever notice. The problem was, cameras weren't cheap. My plan was simple: babysit on weekends, stash away the cash, and one day buy a second-hand Canon that I'd been eyeing in a pawn shop downtown. The Reynolds family helped keep that plan alive. Mark and Jennifer Reynolds lived about 15 minutes from my apartment in a quiet neighborhood that looked like it had been copy-pasted from a suburban postcard. Their two kids, Max and Chloe, were sweet, even when they were a handful. Max was 8 and thought of himself as a scientist, always poking around with magnets, wires, and anything that looked like it could blow up in his imagination. Chloe was 6, softer, clingier, still half living in the world of princess dolls and bedtime stories. Babysitting them reminded me of my little brother Ben, who I didn't see much anymore since the divorce had scattered my family. Watching Max and Chloe sometimes filled the gap. That particular Friday didn't start well. The house had a power outage during the afternoon, and when I arrived, the kids were already restless. We killed time making shadow puppets against the walls and playing cards by flashlight. By the time the lights came back, it was close to 8:30. Max started whining about being hungry. Chloe wanted ice cream, and when I checked the fridge, it looked like a bachelor pad, almost empty. I texted Jennifer, and she replied that they'd be home later than expected and that I could run out if I needed. I hesitated at first. I didn't usually like taking the kids out after dark, but I figured 5 minutes to the 24-hour Green Mart, grab milk, bread, maybe something sweet, and we'd be back in no time. I should have trusted my instincts. From the moment we pulled into that parking lot, something about the night pressed down on me, like an invisible weight. There was a single red shopping cart sitting crooked near my car. One wheel was bent, squeaking every time the wind nudged it. Inside the store, half the ceiling lights flickered, buzzing with that hollow hum that never lets you forget how artificial the air around you feels. The kids didn't notice. They were too busy arguing over cereal. But my nerves were already stretched tight, and I didn't even know yet that the night was about to crawl under my skin and never let go. The first time I noticed him, I tried to brush it off. A man in a gray hoodie leaned against the end of the bread aisle, head tipped down so his face was swallowed in shadow. Denver wasn't exactly crime-free, and I had lived here long enough to know the city carried its share of strange characters. So I told myself he was just another late-night shopper. Still, the way his body angled, like he wasn't really looking at the shelves but at us, made my stomach shift. "Max, Chloe, pick fast," I said, forcing a light tone. "We're on a bedtime countdown." Max tossed a loaf of bread into the basket like it was a basketball. Chloe begged for chocolate milk. I pushed the cart forward, but when we reached the cereal aisle, the man appeared again. This time he was crouched low, pretending to study boxes at kid-eye level, but his posture was wrong. He wasn't scanning labels. He was watching. I reached into my back pocket and checked my phone, mostly to ground myself. A new message popped up from my roommate, Aaron. "That creepy guy near the bus stop last week? Just saw him again tonight by the gas station." My throat tightened. I looked up instinctively and my eyes locked with the gray hood. He was now at the candy racks, not even pretending anymore. Just standing, gaze fixed. Not on me, but on the kids. I swallowed hard. "Okay, team. Mission. Bedtime snack. Move fast." My voice came out higher than I wanted, but the kids were too distracted to notice. At the checkout, things unraveled further. My debit card declined twice. I knew I had money. The cashier shrugged. "System's been glitching tonight. Happens sometimes." I fished out crumpled bills from my purse, all while feeling the man's presence behind me in line. He didn't unload anything onto the conveyor belt. He just stood there, too close, breathing. Max tugged at my sleeve. "That man's weird." "Don't look. Let's go," I whispered. Outside, the parking lot was dim except for one flickering light post near my car. The kids climbed in as I unlocked the doors. I tried to play it casual, but Max's words cut through. "That man smiling at us?" Wise I froze. I hadn't turned around yet. Slowly, I glanced over my shoulder. He was there, directly under the buzzing light, smiling. Not the kind of smile you give strangers, not even the awkward smile of someone caught staring. It was stretched, deliberate, like he knew something I didn't. Every muscle in me screamed to move faster. I buckled the kids in, jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands fumbled with the seatbelt. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the asphalt. I forced myself to look in the rearview mirror. He wasn't walking anymore. He just stood dead center of the lot, staring at us, hands buried deep in his hoodie pocket. And then my phone rang. Unknown number. Against every shred of common sense, I answered. No hello. Just breathing. Slow, heavy. Then a faint chuckle, low and sharp enough to twist my gut. I hung up, slammed the car into gear, and tore out of that parking lot like the devil was on my heels. But the worst part was still waiting for me back at the Reynolds house. The drive back should have been a relief. Instead, every stoplight felt like a trap. My grip tightened on the wheel each time headlights appeared in the mirror, convinced one belonged to him. Chloe hummed quietly in the back, oblivious, while Max tapped his knee against the seat, nervous energy buzzing out of him. When we finally pulled into the Reynolds driveway, I exhaled, but the breath came shaky. I hustled the kids inside, double-checking the locks as if a flimsy chain could keep away the unease settling in my bones. "Why are you acting weird?" Max asked, dropping his shoes by the door. "I'm not," I lied, too quickly. "It's late. Let's brush teeth." I tucked them into bed with more effort than usual, reading Chloe her favorite story in a voice steadier than I felt. When I kissed her forehead, she clung to my wrist longer than usual, whispering, "Don't turn off the light, Sophie." I left her lamp on. Downstairs, I tried to distract myself with homework, but every creak of the house pressed against my ears. I drew the curtains tighter, half convinced I'd look out and see him standing on the sidewalk. By midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I stared at it, pulse hammering. I didn't answer. Instead, I texted Erin, "Do you think that guy follows people?" She replied instantly, "Sophie, come on. Denver's full of creeps. Just don't let them scare you." But it didn't feel like just a creep. It felt deliberate, targeted. An hour later, Chloe's soft voice carried from the stairs. "Sophie?" I looked up, startled. "What are you doing up, sweetheart?" She patted over in her pajamas, clutching her blanket. "Window," she whispered. There was someone outside. My body went rigid. "What do you mean?" Her lips trembled. A man. He was smiling, just smiling at me. I rushed upstairs, heart slamming. Her room faced the side yard. I pulled the curtains wide, searching the shadows, but all I saw were bushes swaying in the night air. No man, no movement, nothing but the pounding of my blood in my ears. "See? Just your imagination," I said softly, tucking her back in. But my hands shook when I adjusted her blanket. For the rest of the night, I didn't close my eyes. I sat in the hallway outside their rooms, listening, waiting, praying. The door wouldn't creak open on its own. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds like none of it had happened. Jennifer Reynolds came home all apologies about being late, and Mark made a joke about how babysitting prepares you for parenting nightmares. I smiled weakly, pretending everything was normal. But inside, I was twisted tight. When I finally got home, I collapsed on the couch. Erin eyed me over her coffee. "You look like hell." I told her everything. The man, the smile, the phone call, Chloe's window. She went quiet, chewing on her lip. Finally, she said, "I think it's the same guy. I swear he was near our apartment last week." That didn't make me feel better. Days passed, but the unease stuck. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more, locking doors twice, avoiding night shifts at the cafe. The Reynolds still asked me to babysit, and I didn't want to lose the income, but every time I pulled up their driveway, my stomach churned. One Saturday evening, Jennifer mentioned casually, "Funny thing, someone's been leaving little notes in our mailbox. No name, just blank paper with smiley faces drawn on them." I froze. "That's creepy." She laughed it off. Probably neighborhood kids. But I knew better. That night, as I tucked the kids in again, Max whispered, "You keep pretending not to notice." "He was in the store, right?" The man, I looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I saw him too. He was watching us. He's scary." My blood went cold. The kids had noticed. It wasn't just me imagining shadows. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I had convinced myself maybe it was over. No phone calls, no strange sightings. I started to relax, until another late babysitting night. Around 10, I stepped onto the back porch to toss trash. The air was cool, the street eerily still. That's when I saw him, standing across the yard, just beyond the fence line, hoodie up, hands in his pockets, smiling. Every instinct screamed to run, but my feet rooted to the spot. I whispered, my voice cracked, barely audible. "What do you want?" He didn't answer, just tilted his head as if amused. Then slowly he turned and walked away into the shadows. I locked every door and window that night, shaking until sunrise. When Jennifer and Mark returned, I finally broke down. I told them everything. To their credit, they took it seriously. They called the police, filed a report, even installed cameras. But the man was never caught. Not that week, not ever. I never babysat again after that summer. I switched my schedule, picked up extra cafe hours, and bought my camera months later than planned. But to this day, whenever I lift the lens to capture strangers on the street, there's always a moment when I wonder if one of them might be looking back at me with the same smile I can't forget. Sometimes the scariest dangers don't come from dark alleys or horror movies. They come from ordinary places where we think we're safe. I learned that ignoring instincts can cost more than a night's peace of mind. When something feels wrong, it usually is. And while we can't always control the people who cross our paths, we can control how seriously we take the signs our gut gives us. Safety isn't paranoia, it's self-respect. I was 19 the autumn of 2014, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet, even if those feet wobbled more often than not. Willow Creek, Vermont, wasn't a place most people stayed in for long. It was one of those countryside towns where everyone knew each other's business. The grocery store closed at 8 sharp, and power outages were as common as Sunday potlucks. My parents had left a year earlier, chasing some new start in Florida after their messy divorce, and I stayed behind. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the fact that I couldn't picture palm trees replacing the maples I'd grown up under. Either way, I stayed, moved into a small apartment near the community college, and started piecing together the idea of a nursing degree. Money, of course, was the problem. My part-time shifts at the diner barely covered rent, let alone tuition. That's how babysitting slipped into my life, not just as a side job, but as a kind of comfort I didn't expect. The Harper family lived on the outskirts of town, in a farmhouse that looked like it had been standing since the Civil War, but had just enough renovations to feel cozy. Jonathan and Claire Harper had 2 kids, Oliver and Grace, who had this way of filling up the silence I didn't even know weighed on me until I was with them. Babysitting there gave me more than cash. It gave me a piece of something that almost felt like family again. That October night when the Harpers left for a wedding reception in town, the sky was already heavy with storm clouds. Claire kissed her kids goodbye with promises they'd be back before midnight. And Jonathan joked about the creaky shutters scaring me more than the thunder. I smiled like I wasn't nervous, but truthfully, storms in Willow Creek had a way of making the world feel cut off. When the winds picked up and the cornfields bent like they were bowing to some invisible force, you could almost believe the town had slipped off the map completely. By 8, the storm hit in full. Rain pounded the roof, thunder rattled the windows, and the old wooden beams groaned like they were remembering every storm they had endured in the last 100 years. Grace curled into my side on the couch with her blanket, whimpering every time the wind howled. Oliver sat cross-legged on the rug, insisting he wasn't scared, but I could see the way his eyes flicked to the windows every time the glass shuddered. "It sounds like someone screaming," Grace whispered once when the wind shrieked against the siding. "It's just the storm," I assured her, kissing the top of her head. "They're old. This place has been through worse. Houses make funny noises when..." But I didn't admit how uneasy I felt. The night pressed against the house like a living thing, and I found myself glancing at the front door more times than I could count, as though the storm wasn't the only thing out there. And then, around 9:15, the noises changed. The first thing I noticed was the gate. It slammed open and shut like someone was deliberately rattling it, though I knew I had bolted it earlier. The sound carried even over the storm, metal against wood, over and over. My stomach sank as I pulled back the curtain just enough to see. The padlock hung loose, swinging with the rain, clanging as if mocking me. "Probably just the wind," I whispered, though my chest tightened. But before I could sit back down with the kids, a sound stopped me cold. A knock. Soft, deliberate. Not the rattle of shutters, not the storm flinging branches at the siding. A knock at the front door. My breath caught. I forced a calm smile for Oliver and Grace. "Probably a branch hit the porch," and I said. Oliver frowned. "Branches don't knock." A second knock came. Sharper this time, the sound echoing through the old farmhouse. My palms went damp. I stood slowly and crept toward the door, every floorboard groaning under my weight. When I peeked through the peephole, my heart stuttered. Nothing. No one. Just rain pooling on the porch, dripping down the railing. I tried to laugh under my breath to convince myself I was being silly. But then came the third round. This time the knocking was faster, angrier, shaking the door in its frame like whoever it was knew how fragile the barrier was. Grace whimpered from the couch. "Hannah, who is it?" "No one," I lied. "Just go back to the story." I pulled out my phone, but the screen mocked me. No service, not even a single bar. And then, as suddenly as it began, the knocking stopped. Silence wrapped the house, heavy and unnatural after the pounding storm. I could hear my own heartbeat, hear the faint hiss of rain against the glass. I turned back toward the kids, and that's when I saw them. Muddy footprints. They trailed across the living room floor, wet and smeared, prints that hadn't been there minutes ago. They were small, uneven, almost child-sized, but too wide to be Grace's or Oliver's. The tracks led down the hallway, straight toward the children's bedroom. My throat tightened as I whispered, "Oliver? Grace?" I ran ahead, heart hammering, throwing the bedroom door wide. The kids were huddled together on the bed, eyes wide, clinging to each other. Grace's voice shook as she pointed toward the closet. He was here. A man. He stood right there. I locked the door behind us with trembling hands, pulling the dresser in front of it even though I knew how flimsy it was against anyone determined. My voice came out hoarse when I whispered, "It's okay. You're safe. I'm here." Oliver stared at me with a seriousness that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. "You don't believe us, do you?" I knelt beside him. "I do. I believe you." My chest ached with how true that was. The storm outside roared, masking every other sound, and that was almost worse. I couldn't tell if the house was settling or if someone was moving downstairs. Every creak felt deliberate. Every groan of the wood felt alive. Grace buried her face into my sweater. Why would he come inside? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Minutes dragged by like hours. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear past the rain. Once I thought I heard footsteps, slow, measured, moving across the living room floor. My breath caught until the sound faded. I tried distracting the kids with whispered stories, but their eyes kept darting to the closet. I forced myself not to look, not to give power to whatever image haunted them. But inside, my own fear gnawed at me. If someone had really been standing in that room, where were they now? When the storm knocked the power out around midnight, the house went black. I fumbled for the emergency flashlight on the nightstand, its narrow beam slicing across the walls. The light swept over the closet door, and I swore I saw it shift. Just slightly, as though it hadn't been closed all the way. My knees nearly gave out. I clutched the flashlight tighter, whispering prayers I hadn't said in years. We didn't sleep that night. None of us. By morning, the storm had passed. The sunlight filtered pale and thin through the curtains, but it felt like salvation. When Jonathan and Claire finally came home, cheerful from their night out, I must have looked half dead. They laughed at first when I told them what had happened, thought it was a ghost story I made up to spook the kids. But when they saw the muddy footprints still drying faintly across the living room floor, their smiles dropped. Jonathan checked every lock, every window. Everything was still bolted. There was no sign of forced entry. Probably tracked in from when we left earlier, he muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced. Claire wrapped the kids in her arms, whispering apologies. I stood off to the side, my hands shaking too hard to hide. That afternoon I went home and collapsed into bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Every sound from the hallway of my apartment made me flinch. I kept replaying Grace's whisper. He stood right there. The police didn't take my report seriously. Happens more often than you think. Storm, old house, scared kids, the officer said. But I knew better. Weeks passed, and I forced myself to keep babysitting. I needed the money, and part of me felt like leaving the Harpers would mean abandoning Oliver and Grace to fears I had stirred up. But the house never felt the same. Every storm rattled me. Every creak dragged me back to that night. I started carrying pepper spray in my bag, kept the phone charged, and sat awake until the Harpers came home. One evening, when Grace handed me a drawing, my chest tightened. It was a crayon picture of the farmhouse. In the window, she had drawn me and Oliver and herself. And outside, standing by the gate, was a man in a gray outline. No face, just a smile. "Why did you draw that?" I asked gently. She shrugged. "Because he's still out there." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if she was imagining it, or if she had seen something again. But in her wide eyes, I recognized my own fear reflected back at me. I never saw the man. Not again. But the memory of those footprints, of that knock, has stayed with me longer than anything else from my teenage years. Safety isn't guaranteed. Not in a farmhouse. Not in a small town. Not even in the places we think are safest. When fear whispers that something is wrong, it's not weakness to listen. It's survival. Trusting your instincts can mean the difference between pretending everything is fine and protecting the people who depend on you. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what we see outside the door, but what's already inside. The winter of 2018 in Madison was one of those long, brutal stretches where the snow never seemed to stop falling, and the sun rarely broke through the clouds. I was 17, halfway through my senior year of high school, and juggling classes, part-time babysitting jobs, and the constant pressure of college applications. Everyone around me seemed to have their futures lined up. Campus tours, acceptance letters, savings accounts. I had none of that. My mom worked long shifts at the hospital, just barely keeping the bills paid after my dad left years ago, and there wasn't a spare dime for things like application fees. That was on me. Babysitting became more than pocket money. It was survival. That's how I found myself spending most of my weekends at the Martins' house. They lived in a tidy 2-story home in a suburban neighborhood where every lawn looked trimmed the same, and neighbors waved like old friends even if they barely knew you. People bragged about how safe it was. Kids rode bikes after dark, doors stayed unlocked, and the loudest trouble was usually just a snowblower running too early in the morning. The Martins were kind, practical people, and their daughter Emma was one of the sweetest kids I'd ever met. 6 years old, endlessly curious, with a laugh that could thaw even the harshest Wisconsin winter night. Babysitting her didn't feel like work. It almost felt like borrowing the childhood simplicity I'd lost too soon. That Saturday night, I arrived at 6 sharp, stomping snow off my boots as Mrs. Martin rushed around putting on her earrings. She smiled gratefully when she saw me. "You're a lifesaver, Claire. We won't be late. Take your time," I told her. "We'll be fine." The evening was normal, almost soothing. Emma and I made macaroni and cheese, her favorite, then spread out on the living room rug with a puzzle that seemed to take forever. She giggled when I pretended to put the wrong pieces in place on purpose, and after a bath and a bedtime story, she was out by 9. I tucked her in, brushed the hair back from her forehead, and whispered goodnight before slipping downstairs with my backpack. By 9:30, I was on the couch, homework open on my lap, surrounded by the quiet hum of a house that wasn't mine, but felt strangely safe. Outside, the snow fell steadily, muffling the world. I remember thinking it was one of those rare nights where nothing could go wrong. But looking back, that thought almost feels like the first warning. At 11:47, the first knock came. It was faint, almost lost in the whistling wind that rattled against the windows. I looked up from my calculus book, blinking, unsure if I'd imagined it. A second later, another knock followed, louder this time, sharper, like knuckles against glass. My stomach tightened. I set my book aside and stood, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The Martins had a back door in the kitchen that led out onto a small porch. That's where the sound had come from. As I tiptoed closer, every nerve in my body seemed to wake up at once. I peeked through the kitchen window and saw only the snow-covered yard stretching into darkness. The porch light glowed weakly, reflecting off the drifts, but no one was there. "Wind," I whispered to myself. "Just the wind." I checked the lock anyway, twisting the deadbolt tight. When I returned to the couch, I tried to dive back into homework, but the silence pressed heavier than before. My phone buzzed and I jumped. Relief washed through me when I saw it was just a reminder for an assignment, but the screen also showed what I'd been dreading: 1 bar of service, flickering in and out. I had barely sat back down when Emma's small voice rang down from upstairs. "Claire! Claire!" I rushed to her room, heart thumping. She was sitting up in bed, clutching her blanket, eyes wide and wet. "What's wrong?" I whispered, brushing her hair back. Her lip trembled. "There's a man," she said. "He's outside. He's watching." My skin prickled all over. I glanced at the window, the curtains drawn but faint light seeping through. "Honey, maybe you saw a shadow. Sometimes snow makes things look funny." But even as I said it, my hands shook. I stayed in Emma's room, sitting cross-legged in the hallway just outside her door. "Sleep, sweetheart. I'll be right here." "Go back too?" She nodded but kept peeking at the curtains. Every creak of the house, every groan of the winter wind made her flinch. And me too. I pulled my homework out again, trying to appear calm, but my pencil tapped nervously against the page. The minutes dragged by. Then came the sound that froze us both. Footsteps. Not the casual crunch of someone shoveling or a neighbor passing by. These were slow, deliberate steps against the snow. The sound carried across the porch, crisp and heavy. Step. Pause. Step. I forced myself to peek through the blinds, my breath caught in my throat. At the edge of the yard stood a tall figure. A dark hoodie, hands in pockets, perfectly still facing the house. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even shift his weight. He just stared. My whole body trembled. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice lodged in my throat. Finally, I whispered, "Stay here," and tiptoed down to the kitchen, grabbing the landline phone from the counter. dead. The storm had knocked out service earlier, and the Martins hadn't mentioned it. My cell showed one flickering bar again. I dialed 911, pacing in circles, praying for it to connect. It rang once, then cut out. When I looked back out the window, the figure was gone. I couldn't stop shaking. I flicked the porch light on, hoping it would scare him away if he was still out there. For a moment, the snow sparkled bright, empty. My heart thudded. Had I imagined him? Then came a noise from upstairs, Emma screaming. I bolted back, 2 steps at a time, throwing open her door. She was pointing at the window, tears streaming down her face. "He was there," she cried. "In the window. I saw him." I yanked the curtains closed, hugging her tightly, even close. "It's okay, honey, it's okay." But it wasn't. Not I dragged a chair against the bedroom door, barricading it as best I could. Emma clung to me. "Don't let him in." I promised her I wouldn't, though inside I felt as helpless as she, whispering, did. The next hour crawled by like a nightmare. I jumped at every sound, every shift of the wind. Once I swore I heard footsteps again, crunching across the snow, circling the house. My phone rang suddenly, startling me. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. There was no greeting, just the sound of breathing. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Then a faint laugh, low and mocking, before the line went dead. That was when my courage cracked completely. The Martins arrived home just after 1. I practically ran down the stairs when I heard the garage door open, nearly collapsing with relief when they stepped inside, stamping snow off their boots. "What happened?" Mrs. Martin asked when she saw my face. I tried to explain, but the words tumbled out in a frantic mess. Knocks, footsteps, a man outside, Emma seeing him in the window. They both went pale. Mr. Martin pulled on his coat again and checked the yard with a flashlight. When he came back, his face was tight. "There are footprints," he said. "Weren't here earlier." Leading from the porch, across the yard, into the woods, the police came, but it felt routine to them. "Probably some teenager messing around," one officer said, though his eyes betrayed doubt when he glanced at Emma, clinging to my side. They took a report, promised to patrol the area, but I could tell they didn't expect to find anyone. I went home that night exhausted but wired, lying awake until the first pale light crept through my bedroom blinds. Every crunch of snow outside my window made me stiffen. I kept babysitting for the Martins, though I never stayed as calm as before. Every creak of their porch, every flicker of a shadow made me check the locks 3 times over. And even now, years later, I remember Emma's final whisper as clearly as the night it happened. He wasn't outside the whole time. I saw him in my window first. Danger doesn't always come crashing in with noise and chaos. Sometimes it stands silently in the dark, watching, waiting, testing how much we ignore before we act. I learned that listening to a child's fear isn't overreacting. It's often seeing what adults are too quick to dismiss. Safety is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about paying attention, trusting instincts, and protecting the vulnerable even when no one else believes you. The spring of 2013 in Salem felt like a fresh start for everyone but me. Tourists were already drifting into town for the witch museums and walking tours, and shops were setting out their seasonal displays of postcards and overpriced trinkets. For most people, it was charming. For me, it was another reminder of how far away my life had drifted from what I'd imagined. I was 20, a literature major at the local college, sharing a cramped off-campus apartment with a roommate who seemed to live on loud music and instant noodles. My parents had divorced in the ugliest way possible a year earlier, and our once lively home had splintered into pieces. My siblings were scattered between them, and I found myself missing the noise of family dinners and the small chaos that used to fill our house. Babysitting became more than a job. It was my way of holding on to that warmth I'd lost. That Saturday, I was scheduled to watch Mason and Ella Bennett. Their parents had recently moved into a modest rental on Pinecrest Avenue. one of those quiet neighborhoods where houses leaned close together, but still managed to feel lonely. Mason was 9, Ella 6, and they were easy kids, playful, curious, always full of questions. When I showed up at their door, Mrs. Bennett already had her coat on, hair pinned up, rushing through a checklist of instructions while their dad jingled the car keys. "They had dinner, but they'll want a snack later," she said, slipping her earrings in. 9, "They'll try to negotiate, but don't give in." Bedtime by, I laughed, promising I wouldn't. I liked the Bennetts. They reminded me of my own family before everything fell apart. Ordinary, a little frazzled, but full of love. By 7:30, the kids were bouncing with too much energy to settle down, so I suggested we walk to the Riverside playground just a block away. The evening air was breezy but mild, that kind of spring weather that smelled faintly of wet earth and blooming trees. I thought the fresh air would tire them out before bedtime. When we arrived, the playground was empty. The swings creaked in the wind and the old yellow street lamp flickered every few seconds. Mason and Ella ran toward the slide, shrieking with laughter, while I sat on a bench, scrolling through my phone. For the first time all week, I felt a tiny bit of peace. That peace lasted all of 5 minutes. It started with the swing. At first, I didn't pay attention, assuming the wind had caught it, but the motion was wrong. Back and forth, smooth, steady, too deliberate. My eyes lingered on it longer than I wanted to admit, until I forced myself to look away. Then Ella tugged on my sleeve, her voice small. "Who's that boy?" I followed her finger. Behind the bushes at the far edge of the playground, a child stood watching us. He looked about Mason's age, pale and thin, his clothes hanging loosely on his body. Even from a distance, I could see the odd stillness of his posture and the unsettling wideness of his smile. I stood up, waving cautiously. "Hey, are you lost?" The boy didn't respond. He tilted his head slowly, almost mechanically, then stepped back behind the bushes. Gone. A prickle of unease crawled up my arms. I turned to gather Mason and Ella, but Mason was staring at the swing set. His voice trembled. "Julia, look." I'll never forget that moment. Both kids froze where they stood. Their bodies went stiff, their faces stretched into eerie, identical smiles, eyes wide, glassy, unblinking. They looked through me, past me, as if I wasn't even there. My chest seized. "Mason! Ella!" I rushed to them, grabbing their shoulders, scaring me. My voice cracked, desperate. "Stop it. You're for what felt like forever." They stayed frozen. Then suddenly they blinked, gasping like they'd surfaced from deep water. Ella burst into tears. "What happened?" she whispered. Mason shook his head, pale and confused. I don't remember." Neither of them remembered smiling. I didn't waste another second at that playground. I grabbed their hands and marched us back to the Bennett's house, forcing calm into my voice, though my pulse was racing. "Bedtime now," I said, trying to keep it light. We had our fun. Once inside, I locked every door and window. My hands trembled as I slid the bolts into place. The kids didn't argue about bed this time. Ella clung to her blanket. Mason hovered near me, unusually quiet. I tucked them in, kissed their foreheads, and whispered reassurances I didn't believe myself. Downstairs, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe the boy had been a neighbor. Maybe the kids had been playing some strange game. But the image of their frozen smiles wouldn't leave me, nor the memory of that pale child's blank expression. I sat on the couch, turning the volume low on the TV to drown out the silence. Hours passed slowly. The old house creaked. Branches tapped against the windows, and each sound made me jolt. By the time the clock neared midnight, my eyes burned from exhaustion. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. My throat went dry as I opened it. A photo filled the screen, the playground, the swing. Empty except for one detail I wished I could unsee. Behind it, half hidden by the bushes, the pale boy, smiling wider than before. I dropped the phone, heart hammering so hard I thought I might be sick. I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the couch with every light on, staring at the front door, listening. At some point after 1 a.m., Mason padded down the stairs, rubbing his eyes. "I can't sleep," he whispered. "I keep seeing that boy." I pulled him into a hug, forcing strength into my voice. "It's okay, Mason. You're safe here." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. I checked my phone again. The message was still there, staring back at me. No reply when I texted back. No answer when I tried to call. Just silence. At 2 a.m., the sound started again. The swing. Faint, rhythmic, creaking. Only this time it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. Slowly, I turned toward the hallway, and my blood ran cold. At the end of the hall, in the faint glow of the lamp, the shadow of a swing moved back and forth against the wall. But there was no swing there, just the shadow, swaying as though it belonged. I clutched Mason tighter. "Back upstairs," I whispered. "Now." We hurried to Ella's room, locking the door behind us. Ella woke, crying softly, clinging to her brother. I held them both, whispering promises until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the blinds. When the Bennetts came home, I told them everything. I expected disbelief, maybe irritation, but Mrs. Bennett went pale, glancing at her husband. He avoided my eyes. Later, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. The last tenant said the same thing. I never babysat for the Bennetts again, not because they didn't ask, they did politely, but because I couldn't bring myself to set foot in that house again. I deleted the photo from my phone, but it didn't matter. It was burned into my memory, along with the sound of the swing and the hollow stillness of those smiles. For weeks after, I jumped at shadows. I checked my siblings' faces whenever I visited home, afraid of seeing that same glassy stare. Some nights, I'd wake to the phantom creak of a swing that wasn't there, and I'd lie in bed, eyes wide open, until morning. I don't know what the boy was. Maybe a ghost, maybe something worse, maybe just a story I'll never untangle. All I know is that I saw something real in the way Mason and Ella froze, something that went beyond childhood imagination. And I know the photo was real, no matter how much I want to believe otherwise. Sometimes I walk past the riverside playground in daylight when kids are laughing and parents are chatting on the benches. Everything looks normal, safe, ordinary. But whenever I glance toward the bushes at the far edge, my chest tightens, and I walk faster, because in the back of my mind I can still see him standing there, pale, smiling, waiting. What I learned that spring is that not all dangers come with warnings we understand. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as something harmless, testing whether we'll notice. Fear taught me to pay attention, to trust instincts, to protect the children first, and to never ignore what feels wrong. But the deepest lesson was this: some things leave marks you can't erase, and pretending they don't exist only gives them more power. Facing fear doesn't mean you can control it, it means you can survive it. Winter in Brookhaven always felt gray and heavy, even when the streets were decorated with strings of holiday lights. I was 19 then, a sophomore at the community college, and I was constantly tired. My days blurred into each other, classes, studying, babysitting jobs, and late nights spent trying to convince myself I was still on track for my dream. All I wanted was to buy a used piano. Music had been the one thing that made me feel alive when I was younger, but ever since my dad left, lessons were out of the question. Babysitting money was my only path toward that dream. That's how I ended up at the Lawsons' house on Maplewood Drive one freezing night in January. They had just moved into town, and when Mrs. Lawson asked around for sitters, someone passed along my number. Their home was large and modern, with tall white walls, bright windows, and a neatly trimmed front yard. It looked safe, like the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. The kids, Evan, 8, and Sophie, 5, were already asleep when I arrived at 8 o'clock. The parents greeted me warmly, gave me a list of emergency numbers, and handed me $20 up front for pizza in case I got hungry. Just before leaving, Mr. Lawson chuckled and said, "Don't mind the landline if it rings. We've been getting random calls, telemarketers or glitches, I think." I waved it off. "I'll be fine," I said, and I meant it. Babysitting usually made me feel grounded. A quiet house, kids asleep upstairs, time to catch up on homework. It almost felt like I was borrowing the stability I'd lost. By 10:30, the house was silent. I curled up on their couch with my laptop, highlighting passages from my history textbook. I was halfway through a chapter when the landline rang, sharp and sudden, echoing through the quiet living room. I assumed it was the Lawsons checking in. I answered quickly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end wasn't theirs. It was a man's voice, low, raspy, and deliberate. "Don't check the kids' room." At first, I thought I misheard. My stomach flipped, more than I wanted it to. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. But the line had already gone dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, heart pounding so loudly, I swore the whole house could hear it. My rational side screamed it had to be a prank call. The Lawsons had warned me about telemarketers. Maybe some creep dialed a random number. That was all. Still, I couldn't focus. I sat back on the couch, staring at my laptop screen but not reading a single word. Every creak of the house made me flinch. The refrigerator hummed, the heat clicked on, my ears strained for anything unusual. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the voice was sharper, angrier, as though the caller knew I had ignored him. "I told you not to check." My hand shook so violently that I dropped the receiver. It clattered against the table. I scanned the windows, the door, the dark corners of the living room. That's when I saw him. Across the street, under the yellow glow of a streetlight, a man stood perfectly still, tall, shoulders hunched inside a dark hoodie. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just stared at the Lawson house. My throat closed. I grabbed my cell phone, but when I pressed the screen, all the bars were gone. Zero signal. I tried calling the Lawsons anyway, but the call failed. Panic tightened in my chest. My eyes darted back to the streetlight. He was still there, watching. Then the landline rang again. Against every instinct, I answered. The voice on the other end whispered every detail of what I was wearing. Tied back. Little silver necklace. Red sweater. Hair. I pressed a hand to my chest. Whoever it was, they weren't just across the street. They were watching me, right then, in real time. I couldn't stay frozen any longer. The kids. I had to check on the kids. I crept upstairs, heart hammering with every step. Evan and Sophie's bedroom doors were closed. I opened Sophie's door first. She was curled up, breathing evenly, fast asleep with her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. Relief nearly buckled my knees. I checked Evan next. Same thing. Safe. Unaware. I shut their doors quietly and whispered to myself, "It's fine. They're fine." Back downstairs, I closed every curtain in the living room, turned off the lamp to make it harder for anyone outside to see in. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to think logically. Then the landline rang again. I lifted the receiver with trembling fingers. Before I could speak, the voice came through, lower this time, almost like a growl. "Check again." I slammed the phone down, chest heaving. I wanted to run, but where? Outside was worse. Upstairs was the only option. I grabbed my bag and hurried back up to Sophie's room. I locked the door behind me, dragging a chair under the knob. Sophie stirred but didn't wake. I sat on the floor beside her bed, clutching my phone even though it showed no signal. Minutes ticked by like hours. Then, faintly, I heard it. The sound of crunching footsteps on the frozen grass outside. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. I forced myself to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. He was closer now. The man in the hoodie. He wasn't under the streetlight anymore. He was standing at the edge of the Lawsons' yard, his head tilted upward, as if he knew exactly which room I was in. I ducked down, breath ragged. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped my phone. I dialed 911 on the landline in the bedroom, praying it would work. It did. The dispatcher's calm voice steadied me a little. I whispered everything, the calls, the man outside, the children. She told me to stay on the line, to stay quiet, that officers were already on their way. The minutes between that call and the arrival of the flashing lights were the longest of my life. I crouched beside Sophie's bed, whispering to her stuffed rabbit, promising myself I'd keep them safe. When the red and blue lights finally painted the curtains, relief hit me so hard I almost sobbed. I peeked outside again. The man was gone. By the time officers searched the property, there was no sign of him. No man, no hoodie. But near the kids' windows outside, they found cigarette butts, still fresh, and footprints leading toward the woods. When the Lawsons returned home, the relief on their faces turned to something else when I told them what happened. Their color drained. They admitted their last babysitter had quit suddenly, saying she'd gotten weird phone calls at night. They hadn't thought much of it at the time. I was too shaken to be angry. All I wanted was to go home. That night, lying in bed, I replayed it all. The voice, the description of my sweater, the figure under the streetlight. I didn't close my eyes until morning. I never babysat again. The money didn't matter anymore, not compared to the thought of that man watching me, waiting. Weeks later, walking home from campus at dusk, I felt it again. The prickle on the back of my neck. I turned. Across the street, under a flickering light, a man in a hood stood still, head tilted, as though he'd been waiting for me. I walked faster, but the truth settled deep inside me. Some things don't end just because the night does. We trust quiet neighborhoods, locked doors, or the idea that danger is far away. But fear reminds us it can be close, watching, patient. That night changed me. I learned to trust my instincts, to take warning signs seriously, and to never dismiss fear as just nerves. The most important lesson of all, your safety is worth more than money, more than pride, more than pretending everything is fine. If something feels wrong, it probably is, and listening to that instinct might save your life. The summer of 2015 was a blur of deadlines, side jobs, and late nights that always ended with me hunched over my sketchpad. I was 20 then, a graphic design student in Redwood Hills, California, clinging to the hope that if I worked hard enough, something would break my way. Tuition bills never stopped arriving, and my mom, already stretched thin paying rent, couldn't help much. I had promised myself that summer I would focus on my portfolio for a contest that offered an internship. It felt like my chance to breathe, to finally get noticed. Babysitting wasn't part of the plan that night. My sketchpad was open across my lap when the phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Myers. She sounded rushed, almost frantic. Their usual sitter had canceled last minute, and she begged me to come watch the kids so she and her husband could catch a movie they'd planned for weeks. I hesitated. I really did. But when she offered extra pay and mentioned how much the kids liked me, guilt gnawed at my stubbornness. I said yes, grabbed my bag, and walked the few blocks to Sycamore Lane. The Myers house was big and modern, the kind with long hallways that swallowed sound and made you wonder why people needed so many rooms. Inside, it smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The kids, Noah, 10, and Lucy, 7, were already in their pajamas, winding down for the night. They were good kids, quiet, polite, easy to handle. Mrs. Myers gave me the emergency list, kissed the kids, and hurried out with her husband. By 9:30, I had tucked both children into bed upstairs. Lucy wanted her nightlight on, and Noah insisted on keeping his door cracked open. I told them I'd be downstairs if they needed anything, then padded back down to the living room. For the first time all day, I let myself relax. I sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels on their massive flat-screen TV. It was the kind of television you couldn't imagine affording in a student apartment. I scrolled on my phone, half watching, half sketching ideas in my notebook. That was when it happened. The TV flickered. Not static, something else. The screen blinked, and for less than a second I swore I saw a hallway. Not a movie, not a commercial. A hallway that looked eerily like the one upstairs in the Myers house. I blinked hard. My rational side pushed it away. Maybe an input glitch, maybe some interference. I switched the channel and brushed it off. But the image burned in my mind long after it disappeared. I was still thinking about it when Lucy's small voice echoed down the stairwell. "Elena, can you turn the TV down? Someone's talking really loud in the hallway." The remote slipped from my hand. My throat tightened. I shot up from the couch, heart racing. Upstairs, the hallway was empty, silent. I checked both bedrooms. Lucy was trembling under her blanket, Noah half asleep but annoyed. I forced a smile. "It's just the storm rattling the windows," I told her. She nodded reluctantly, clutching her stuffed bear. But when I walked back downstairs, the silence of that house pressed in on me heavier than before. At 10:47 p.m., the landline rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the shrill sound. Who even used landlines anymore? I told myself it had to be the Myers checking in, so I answered quickly. "Hello?" What I heard wasn't their voice. It was male. Distorted. Low, almost like it was crawling through static. "Don't look at the TV." Then the line cut. I stood frozen with the receiver pressed against my ear, pulse pounding so hard I could hear it. My first instinct was denial. A prank, I thought. Wrong number. My imagination filling in the rest. But even as I tried to rationalize it, my stomach knotted. I turned toward the living room. The television was on again, but no channel played. The screen showed something else, a live feed. I knew it immediately. It was the kids' bedroom. I recognized the little bookshelf, the window, the nightlight, and Noah and Lucy, fast asleep. I dropped the phone. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me upstairs. I tore through their room, ripping open the closet, yanking open drawers, looking under the bed. Nothing. The children stirred, confused and half asleep. "Everything's okay," I lied. My voice cracked. Noah mumbled something that froze me. He smiles too much. "I don't like the man who keeps standing in the corner." I stared at him, my chest tight. He was still asleep, his words drifting out like fragments of a dream. But they didn't feel like dreams. I grabbed both kids, dragging blankets and all, and hauled them downstairs. My hands shook so hard I dropped my phone twice. I locked every door, every window. The kids looked at me wide-eyed but didn't protest. When I glanced back at the TV, the feed was gone, just static. I tried to call the Myers on my cell. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I tried my mom too. Nothing. My bars flickered like the phone couldn't decide whether it had service or not. The landline rang again. The sound sliced through the silence. My hands trembled as I answered, hoping, praying. It was the parents. It wasn't. The same distorted male voice whispered slower this time. "Why did you look?" I slammed the phone down and grabbed the kids tighter. Lucy whimpered, pressing her face into my sweater. Noah asked, "Who keeps calling?" But I didn't answer. I wanted to run out the front door, but the thought of stepping into the pitch-black street with two kids felt worse. My only option was to hold out until the Myers or someone came back. I pulled them onto the couch with me, forcing a smile. "Sleepover. We're camping out here, okay?" They nodded reluctantly. I pretended to watch cartoons on mute, trying to distract them. But my eyes kept darting to the shadows in the hallway, the staircase, the blank TV screen. At 11:22, the screen lit again. My stomach dropped. This time the feed wasn't upstairs. It was the living room. The three of us, huddled together on the couch. And in the background, near the cabinet, a figure. Tall, lean, head slightly tilted, smiling. I spun around. The cabinet was empty. No one was there. But the feed, grainy, black and white, showed him standing there like he belonged in the room with us. I couldn't think straight. My mind scrambled between protecting the kids, figuring out where the cameras were, and fighting the urge to scream. I forced myself to grab the landline again. "No one. What's your emergency?" The voice of the dispatcher nearly made me cry with relief. I stammered everything: the calls, the TV, the kids, the figure. She told me to stay calm, that officers were already on their way, to lock myself in a room if possible. Minutes passed like hours. I paced with the phone clutched to my ear, the kids clinging to my legs. Then we heard it, a faint creak from above us, the attic. I thought my heart stopped. I whispered it into the phone. The dispatcher told me to stay put. By the time red and blue lights flashed outside the house, I nearly collapsed from relief. Officers swept the home, their heavy boots pounding against the floorboards. They ordered us outside. I wrapped the kids in blankets and carried them to the squad car. When the police returned, their faces were pale. In the attic, hidden behind insulation, they found a small camera system. Wires snaked down into the cabinet in the living room. Cigarette butts and soda cans were shoved into a corner. Someone had been living up there, watching, recording, for weeks, maybe longer. The Myers came home just as the officers were finishing. Mrs. Myers cried, clutching her kids like she'd never let go again. Mr. Myers' face was grim, his hand gripping mine like he was afraid I'd disappear too. They apologized over and over, but I could barely hear them. My mind was stuck on the images burned into my brain. Noah's half-asleep warning, Lucy's trembling voice, the man on the TV feed smiling from the corner of the room. I never babysat again after that night. The money wasn't worth it. My sketches, my contest, even my dream of an internship, all of it seemed trivial compared to the reality that someone had been there, living above, watching. Months later, when life had started to feel normal again, it happened. I opened my laptop to check email, scrolling through spam and school notices. One message stopped me cold. No subject, no sender I recognized, just an attachment. I clicked it before I could stop myself. The photo was grainy, black and white. It was me, sitting on the Myers couch that night. My face pale, eyes locked on the television. And in the corner, blurred but unmistakable, that same figure. Smiling, safety isn't guaranteed just because a house feels secure or because a neighborhood seems quiet. Evil doesn't always break the door down. Sometimes it hides in the spaces we never think to check. Trusting your instincts, taking fear seriously, and never ignoring the small signs, that's what keeps us safe. Fear can be paralyzing, but it can also be the voice that saves your life. Always listen to it. I never imagined babysitting would become such a lifeline. Back in October of 2014, I was 20 years old, a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, struggling the way a lot of students do, juggling tuition, rent, groceries, and the constant reminder that loans were piling up. My part-time job at the campus bookstore was steady, but barely enough to cover the basics. Babysitting was supposed to be easy money. Quiet houses, sleeping kids, time to study in peace. That's how I ended up at the Hendersons' place on a Friday night. Mark and Julia Henderson lived in a renovated Victorian house at the edge of town, one of those old, elegant structures that looked better on postcards than in real life. Tall windows, narrow halls, and a porch that seemed to sag with history. They had 2 kids, Liam, 7, and Sophie, 5. Sweet kids, polite. But I couldn't shake how strangely quiet they were, like they'd been taught to speak only in whispers. Julia gave me a quick rundown before they left. Bedtime at 8:30, snacks in the fridge, Wi-Fi password on the fridge magnet. She spoke quickly, distracted. As she walked me through the kitchen, she brushed past the basement door and said sharply, "Oh, that's just storage, don't bother with it." Her tone carried finality, like she was warning me not to ask questions. By the time I got the kids into bed, after a movie and a story, They were out cold. I double-checked the locks because Julia had mentioned a couple break-ins in the neighborhood. Then I poured a glass of water and settled into the living room with my laptop. It felt like the perfect setup: quiet house, steady paycheck, and a chance to catch up on history notes. But half an hour later, just as I was settling into the rhythm of reading, I heard it. A soft, muffled crying sound. At first I thought it was Sophie. I climbed the stairs and peeked into their rooms. Both kids were asleep, their breathing steady, faces peaceful. I lingered for a moment, staring at them to make sure. Then I headed back down, convincing myself it was just the wind or an old pipe in the walls. Except the sound didn't stop. It grew clearer, sharper. It wasn't upstairs. It was beneath me, from the basement. I froze in the hallway, straining to listen. The crying was faint, like a child calling for help but buried under layers of wood and air. My first instinct was to call the Hendersons, but I imagined their reaction. Me, the college babysitter, panicking over nothing. I clenched my jaw and decided to check it out myself. I found a flashlight in the hallway drawer. My hand hesitated on the basement doorknob, Julia's warning still echoing in my mind. But curiosity, and something deeper, something protective, pushed me forward. The door groaned when I opened it. The crying stopped instantly. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring into the darkness below. The silence was so heavy, I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears. I stepped down slowly, the wooden stairs creaking under my weight. The beam of my flashlight slid across stacks of dusty boxes, shelves full of old furniture and cobwebs clinging to corners. The basement smelled of damp earth and rust. Then my light caught something odd. Children's toys scattered across the concrete floor. Not Liam or Sophie's toys, these were older. Faded dolls with cracked faces, wooden blocks, a tin car with peeling paint. My chest tightened. I knew the toys upstairs. These didn't belong to the Henderson kids. That's when I saw it. In the far corner stood a rocking horse. Its paint was chipped, its body worn with age, and it was moving. Slowly, back and forth, rocking on its own, though the basement air was still. I whispered to myself, "No, that's not possible." The air turned colder. My breath came out visible. And then, from somewhere near the rocking horse, I heard it. A whisper, low, deliberate. "Ethan." My name. My grip tightened on the flashlight. My whole body shook, but I couldn't look away from that corner. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at the rocking horse swaying back and forth. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My name whispered out of the shadows again, softer this time, like it was crawling along the floor. That was when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sound made me jolt so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. On the screen was a new message from an unknown number. It read, "Don't wake them. They're safer asleep." I felt my throat close up. Whoever was sending that text, they knew where I was, they knew about the kids, and they were watching. Suddenly, every shadow in the basement seemed alive. I bolted back up the stairs, slamming the door shut and locking it. My chest heaved as I tried to think rationally. Call 911. That's what I should do. But when I dialed, my screen froze. The call failed. No service. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10. My eyes darted up the stairs toward the kids' room. My mind kept circling back to the message. Don't wake them. Whoever it was didn't want the kids disturbed. I crept upstairs and pushed open their doors. Liam and Sophie were asleep, their faces calm. I wanted to shake them awake, to run with them into the night, but I couldn't. What if I put them in more danger? What if the person watching us was inside the house? I shut their doors gently, whispering a promise to keep them safe. My knees nearly gave out as I walked back downstairs. That's when I heard the basement door creak. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. The basement door was moving, slowly, I could see the knob twisting from across the room. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy lamp, and raised it like a weapon. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. But the door never opened all the way. It stopped, left slightly ajar. Silence stretched on, heavier and heavier, until my arms shook from holding the lamp. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text. This one said, "Stop pretending you can protect them." A chill ran through me. My eyes darted to the front window. For a split second, I thought I saw movement across the yard, a tall silhouette near the trees, watching. The landline rang suddenly, the shrill sound nearly sending me to the floor. I hesitated, then answered. Static hissed on the other end, and through the static, that same whisper. "Ethan." I slammed the phone down, my breath ragged. I couldn't take it anymore. I dialed 911 from the landline, praying it would work. This time it connected. I blurted everything, the crying, the toys, the texts, the voice. The dispatcher told me to lock myself and the kids in a room. Officers were on their way. Minutes dragged like hours. Every sound, the wind, the creak of the house, made me jump. I gripped the lamp like my life depended on it, waiting. Finally, red and blue lights spilled across the front windows. Police stormed the house, guns drawn, their boots echoing through every hallway. They found nothing in the basement except the toys, the rocking horse, and old furniture. No intruder, no sign of forced entry. But in the dirt beneath the rocking horse they found footprints, small, child-sized, leading into the shadows and stopping at the wall. The Hendersons came home as the police were finishing their search. Julia looked pale, her hands shaking as she hugged her kids. Mark kept asking questions the officers couldn't answer. No one could explain the texts, the whispers, or the toys in the basement. I gave my statement, but the whole time, I felt like someone was still watching. Even as I left, even as I walked back to my dorm under the cold October sky, the feeling clung to me. I quit babysitting not long after. No amount of money was worth that kind of fear. But the memory stuck with me. A week later, I was in the library finishing an essay when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. The message said, "Don't forget, I'm still here." I deleted it instantly, but I couldn't erase the chill it left behind. To this day, I still wake up some nights convinced I hear that soft, muffled crying beneath the floorboards. And sometimes when I walk home late and the streets are quiet, I swear I hear my name whispered in the dark. You can't ignore the small things that feel wrong. A sound, a shadow, a feeling in your gut. Those instincts exist for a reason. Curiosity might get you answers, but awareness can keep you alive. Always listen to your fear. It's not weakness. It's warning. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if the choices I made that night were really choices at all, or if I was just drifting into a current I couldn't escape. My name is Clara Jensen, and in the spring of 2017 I was 22 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. I wasn't anyone special. I wasn't particularly brave or reckless. I was just trying to keep my head above water, splitting myself between 2 part-time jobs and classes at the local community college. Psychology had been my major, though most nights I felt too tired to believe I would ever graduate. Money was always the problem. Rent, books, food. It never stopped piling up. That's why babysitting had slipped into my life like an accident that made sense. I told myself it was easier than waitressing or pulling coffee for strangers. And at first it was. Kids were unpredictable, but honest. And a quiet night in a family's living room gave me a kind of borrowed stability I didn't have in my own life. That Friday evening started ordinary. I was sitting in the Reynolds living room, watching their kids. Eli, who was 8, thoughtful and serious beyond his years, and Hannah, who was 6 and still lived in the endless sunshine of early childhood. Their parents had left for a dinner party across town. I'd been asked to keep the kids fed, get them ready for bed, and then, once their cab arrived at 10:45, ride with them across the city to their grandmother's house. The Reynolds were protective, the kind of parents who double-checked every door lock before leaving, so it didn't strike me as unusual that they pre-arranged the ride. It was raining that night, a thin drizzle tapping on the windows. Eli and Hannah sat cross-legged on the floor, building a crooked tower of blocks, their giggles filling the room. I remember thinking it was one of those nights where nothing bad could happen. That was the lie life was telling me then. When the cab finally pulled up, I gathered their backpacks, jackets, and snacks. The driver stepped out and waved. He looked to be in his mid-40s, stocky, with thinning hair and a smile that seemed worn from too much use. The kind of smile someone wears when they want to be liked before they're really seen. "Evening, folks," he said warmly, his voice carrying through the drizzle. "Of this weather. Hop in. Let's get you out." The kids slid into the back seat. I climbed in after them, buckling Hannah's seatbelt before fastening my own. The driver glanced at us in the mirror and pulled away smoothly. For a few minutes, it was nothing. Streetlights flickering on wet pavement, windshield wipers sweeping rhythmically, the sound of children whispering to each other about cartoons. I texted their grandmother. "On our way. See you soon." She sent a quick heart emoji back, and I felt reassured. But then I noticed something that scraped against my nerves. The driver kept adjusting the rearview mirror, not to watch the traffic, but to study the kids. Every time Hannah giggled, his lips curled into a faint smile. It was small, almost harmless, but I felt my stomach tighten anyway. I told myself not to overthink it. People glance at kids all the time. Still, I found myself looking away from the mirror. We drove another 5 minutes before I realized we should have turned left toward the highway. Instead, the driver turned right, down a narrow street lined with shuttered warehouses. "Excuse me," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "I think you missed the turn," he chuckled softly, his eyes on the road. "Relax. Shortcut." Rain pattered harder against the windows. My phone buzzed, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I gripped it tighter. That was the moment the night began to bend into something I would never forget. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't show fear in front of the kids. Eli leaned toward me, his voice small and tight. "This doesn't look like the way to Grandma's." I smiled as if nothing was wrong. "It's fine, buddy. Just a different route." But my palms were clammy against my jeans. I checked the locks casually, tugging at the handle. Nothing. Child lock. The driver's eyes flicked up in the mirror, watching. "Everything good back there?" "Yeah," I answered quickly, my throat dry. "All good." I needed to think. My mind ran through possibilities. Was this guy really dangerous, or just weird? Could I call the grandmother? If I made a scene, would that scare the kids more? Pretending to be casual, I dialed the grandmother's number. I spoke loudly into the phone. "Yes, Mrs. Reynolds. We're about 10 minutes away. Yes, the driver is taking the usual highway route." For the first time, the driver's smile faltered. His hands tightened on the wheel, and he pressed the accelerator just slightly harder. My stomach dropped. The rain grew heavier, blurring the streetlights into pale smears. The buildings around us looked abandoned, their windows boarded and dark. That's when my phone buzzed again. I expected a reply from the grandmother, but the notification wasn't from her. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "Stop talking. They can't hear you." The words punched the air from my lungs. My first thought was that someone had hacked me, but that didn't make sense. I hadn't given my number to anyone but the Reynolds. I stared at the screen too long. The driver must have noticed because he said almost gently, "You okay back there?" "Yeah," I said quickly, stuffing the phone into my jacket. My pulse thudded in my ears. At the next red light, the only car we'd seen in 15 minutes, another vehicle pulled up behind us. Desperation surged through me. I rolled down my window halfway and leaned out, waving frantically. The driver snapped his head toward me. His voice was sharp now, stripped of friendliness. "Your hands back inside." Put the light turned green. He hit the gas. The kids clung to my arms, their little fingers digging in. Eli whispered, "Clara, what's happening?" I tried to answer, but my phone buzzed again. Another message, same number. "You shouldn't have done that, now we're not going to Grandma's." I tasted metal in my mouth, fear so sharp it felt physical. I realized this was no misunderstanding. Whoever this man was, he wasn't taking us to safety. And we were trapped. My instinct was to scream, to throw myself at the door, but panic would only fuel his control. I forced myself to breathe. Think, Clara. Think. The city felt miles away now. The streets we drove through were silent, the rain masking every sound. The kids huddled close, their earlier chatter gone, replaced with frightened silence. I pulled my phone out again, hiding it against my thigh. I typed a text to the grandmother. "Call police, driver not going to you, wrong route, please hurry." I hit send, no signal. My heart dropped. Of course, these industrial zones were dead spots. The driver glanced into the mirror, his eyes darker now. "Phone's down, miss. Let's just enjoy the ride." His voice had lost its softness. It carried something heavier, something that made my skin crawl. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep steady. He smiled faintly. "Someplace quiet. Safer than the highway in this weather." "That's not what the parents arranged." He chuckled. "Parents don't always know what's best, do they?" I felt Eli's hand squeeze mine. He knew. Hannah pressed her face against my arm, too scared to look up. The car slowed as we turned down an even narrower street. The warehouses gave way to chain-link fences and empty lots. The road was nearly dark except for the dull glow of a single street lamp ahead. I had one chance. "Sir," I said, my voice firmer, "pull over now. Let us out." He didn't respond. His hands gripped the wheel like stone. I reached forward suddenly, grabbing at the gear shift. He roared, hand away, the car swerving hard against the curb before he straightened it. "Sit back," and shoved my. The kids screamed. I pulled back, shaking. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would tear out of my chest. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text. "Don't fight him. Don't make him angry. We're almost there." I stared at the words, horror crawling through me. Whoever was texting knew exactly where we were. The driver slowed, pulling toward a fenced lot with a single warehouse lit by one flickering bulb. He turned into the gravel drive, tires crunching. I knew then. We had minutes left before something irreversible happened, and I had to act. The car rolled to a stop near the warehouse. The rain softened, but the silence it left behind was worse. The driver killed the engine. For a moment, the only sound was our ragged breathing. He turned slowly in his seat, his smile gone. His eyes fixed on me. "Since you got in this car, you've been a problem." Eli's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. Hannah whimpered, burying her face. I swallowed, forcing courage I didn't feel. "The Reynolds know where we are. They'll call the police." He chuckled low, shaking his head. "You really think anyone's coming?" His words cut like knives. My brain raced. There had to be a way out. He reached for the keys, slipping them into his pocket. Then he opened his door, ordered, "All of you. Out!" He panic flared. Once outside, I knew we'd have no protection. The lot was surrounded by fence, the warehouse looming like a dark mouth. "No," I said, surprising even myself. My voice cracked but held. "We're not getting out." His eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Before I could answer, headlights swept across the lot. Another car had turned in, its beams cutting through the rain. The driver froze. I didn't think. I threw my weight against my door, slamming it open. "Run!" I screamed. The kids bolted, their small shoes splashing on wet gravel. I grabbed my phone and scrambled out after them, heart hammering. The other car screeched closer, horn blaring. The driver cursed, lunging back toward his seat. I didn't look back. I grabbed Eli and Hannah's hands and ran toward the fence. The metal links rattled as I climbed, shoving the kids over first. My jeans tore on the wire, my palms burning, but adrenaline carried me. Behind us, the driver roared in rage. The engine of his car revved, tires spitting gravel. We tumbled over the fence and hit the wet ground on the other side. I grabbed the kids, hauling them toward the street. Headlights blinded us again. The second car skidded to a stop just feet away. The door burst open. 2 men in uniforms, security guards. They shouted, "What's happening?" I sobbed the words. "He tried to take us, he's still in there." But when they turned, the warehouse lot was empty. The cab was gone. The police came within minutes. I told them everything, voice shaking, every detail from the moment we left the Reynolds house to the text messages on my phone. They took the phone, nodding gravely, but when they checked the number, it was untraceable, a burner. The Reynolds arrived soon after, pale and terrified. Hannah ran into her mother's arms, sobbing. Eli clung to his father. I stood apart, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The officers searched the area, but they found nothing. No trace of the cab, no trace of the man. It was as if he had vanished into the night. In the days that followed, the police called me for updates, but nothing ever came of it. They couldn't find the car, the driver, or the origin of the texts. The Reynolds were furious at the cab company, but even they swore no such driver had been dispatched under their name. For months afterward, I couldn't ride in a stranger's car. Every time a man glanced in the mirror, my skin prickled with fear. Nights became worse. I'd wake to the sound of my phone buzzing, convinced I'd see another message. "You shouldn't have done that." But it never came. Years later, I still think of that night, of the rain, the children's hands in mine, the sick feeling of being hunted. I never stopped babysitting entirely, but I learned to trust my instincts more than politeness. Because sometimes the difference between safety and danger is the moment you decide not to stay quiet. Trust your instincts, especially when others depend on you. Danger rarely announces itself with certainty. It often comes disguised in politeness, in routine, in small moments that feel off but easy to dismiss. Ignoring those feelings can cost more than we imagine, but listening to them, speaking up, taking action, can be the very thing that saves lives. When I look back at the summer of 2015, I remember the heat more than anything else. Denver always has its warm days, but that year seemed unbearable. Maybe it was the stress of new motherhood still lingering in my bones. Maybe it was the constant tug of my career, or maybe it was simply the suffocating weight of responsibility that made every breath feel heavy. My name is Emily Carter. I was 28 years old at the time, a marketing consultant trying to climb the ladder at my firm. After 5 months of maternity leave, I had returned to a whirlwind of deadlines and conference calls, and though I tried to put on a brave face, I was drowning. My husband, Daniel, was supportive, but he was fighting his own battles at work, staying late at the office more nights than not. Our daughter, Maya, had just turned 5, and she was the brightest part of my day, the reason I forced myself out of bed every morning. But loving her didn't erase the exhaustion that ate away at me. We needed help. Not just any help. Someone trustworthy. Someone who could ease the pressure without adding to it. I resisted the idea of daycare because I wanted Maya's evenings to feel warm and personal. A babysitter seemed like the best compromise. That's when Sophie Lane came into our lives. I met her through a neighbor who said Sophie had been looking for work. She was 21, soft-spoken, with an almost fragile demeanor. She told me she had dropped out of college because of finances and was saving money to go back. She didn't come across like most girls her age. No loud attitude, no cockiness, just polite, attentive, and almost eager to please. Maya adored her from the start. I still remember that first evening when Sophie sat cross-legged on the living room floor building Lego castles with her. Maya laughed harder than I had heard in weeks. Watching them, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Within weeks, Sophie had become part of our routine. She arrived on time, never complained, and carried herself with a patience that seemed rare for someone so young. She learned Maya's favorite bedtime stories by heart. She even brought over her own coloring books so she and Maya could draw together. Daniel and I started calling her our third hand. But even then, I can admit now, there was a faint unease that I pushed away. I couldn't quite name it. Maybe it was the way Sophie's eyes lingered on our house when she thought no one was watching. Or maybe it was how she always seemed to know where everything was, even in rooms I hadn't shown her. It was subtle, just a flicker of something in my gut. Still, life demanded trust. When you're exhausted, you want to believe you found someone safe to lean on. And so I let Sophie in. I told myself it was the right choice. I told myself she was family. And for a time, that's exactly what she felt like. The first time I noticed something missing, it was only a $20 bill. I had tucked it into the side pocket of my purse, planning to use it for coffee and parking the next day. When I reached for it, it was gone. I blamed myself. Maybe I had spent it and forgotten. Maybe Daniel had grabbed it without telling me. Life with a child is messy, disorganized, cluttered. I pushed the thought aside. But then it happened again. A pair of small gold earrings I wore often, delicate hoops Daniel had given me for our anniversary, disappeared from my jewelry box. This time I knew I hadn't misplaced them. I searched the bedroom 3 times, emptied the laundry basket, checked every drawer. Nothing. When I told Daniel, he shrugged. The gym or at work. You've been running on fumes. Maybe you lost them, and I wanted to believe him. But something in my chest tightened. The earrings had been on the dresser that morning. I remembered because I'd chosen not to wear them. They hadn't simply vanished. A week later, I walked into the living room and saw Sophie leaning close to Maya, whispering. Maya was smiling, nodding eagerly. When Sophie noticed me, she straightened quickly, her face flushed. "What's going on?" I asked. "Oh, nothing," Sophie said with a nervous laugh. "We were just playing pretend." But later that night, while tucking Maya into bed, she said something that made my heart stop. "Mommy, Sophie says some things are our little secret, like when she tells me special stuff. She said you don't have to know everything." The words lodged in my throat. Secrets. Between my daughter and her babysitter. I smiled for Maya's sake, kissed her forehead, and told her good night. But as soon as I closed her door, I leaned against the wall and felt my pulse race. Something was wrong. I couldn't accuse Sophie outright, not without proof. If I was wrong, I'd not only ruin a relationship that had become central to our lives, but I'd also risk looking paranoid. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, lying awake next to Daniel, I whispered, "What if Sophie's been stealing from us?" He sighed. Don't start imagining things. She's been good to Maya. Don't overthink it." I wanted to scream. Why was it always overthinking when my instinct spoke? So I made a decision. If no one else would take my concerns seriously, I'd get the truth myself. The next day, I bought a small nanny cam. The camera was small, discreet, and easy to hide on a bookshelf in the living room. I told myself it was just to ease my mind. Maybe I'd catch nothing but hours of Maya playing and Sophie reading her magazines. Maybe then I'd finally be able to sleep without replaying the whispers and the missing jewelry in my head. The first 2 days were uneventful. Sophie and Maya colored, watched cartoons, played with dolls. Sophie looked like any ordinary sitter. Attentive, patient, gentle. But on the 3rd day, everything changed. I watched the footage late that night after Maya had gone to bed. Daniel was still at the office, so I sat alone with the laptop open on the kitchen table. My finger hovered over the play button longer than it should have. At first, it was normal. Maya on the rug drawing while Sophie flipped through her phone. But then, when Maya wandered upstairs for a toy, Sophie's posture shifted. She set her phone down, glanced toward the stairs, and then moved quickly to the sideboard. She opened the drawer, rifled through envelopes, and pulled out cash. My stomach dropped as I watched her slide the bills into her bag. I kept watching, numb. Later in the footage, she slipped one of Maya's bracelets into her pocket. At one point, she crouched by the cabinet where we kept spare keys and rummaged as if searching for something. By the end of the video, my hands were shaking so hard I had to close the laptop. I had my proof. When Daniel came home, I showed him. He swore under his breath, pacing the kitchen. You were right." "Jesus, of course I was right," I snapped, though my voice cracked. "Maya, she's been stealing from us. He rubbed his face. "What do we do?" I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to call the police that second. Another part wanted to confront her myself, to see her face when I told her I knew. But mostly I wanted to scream. I had let this girl into my home. I had trusted her with my daughter, and she had betrayed every ounce of that trust. The next day, I asked Sophie to come over early. I told her we needed to talk. Sophie arrived wearing her usual polite smile, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Maya ran to hug her, and for a brief, painful second I almost doubted myself again. But then I remembered the video. "Maya, sweetheart," I said gently, to talk to Sophie. "Why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Mommy needs." Maya skipped upstairs, leaving us alone. I turned to Sophie. "We need to have a serious conversation." Her smile faltered. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said flatly. "It isn't. I know you've been stealing from us." Her face went pale. "What? No, I would never. Don't lie to me." I slammed the laptop shut on the table where I'd queued up the footage. "I have everything on video. You went through our drawers. You took money, jewelry. You even took Maya's bracelet." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head quickly, then covered her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry. Please, Emily. I didn't know what else to do." Her voice cracked with desperation. Between sobs, she spilled the truth. She was drowning in credit card debt, behind on rent, barely scraping by. She said she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. She said she thought she could just borrow until she got back on her feet. I stared at her, my chest tight. Secrets from me. "Borrow? You manipulated my daughter. You told her to keep her hands dropped from her face." She looked at me with wide, wet eyes. "I didn't mean it like that. God, I didn't know what else to do. Please don't call the police. I'll pay it back. Every cent, just give me another chance." For a moment, the room was silent except for her sobs. I wanted to feel pity. I wanted to believe her. But all I could think about was Maya, about her innocent trust being twisted. "No," I said finally. My voice was cold. "You don't get another chance." I told Sophie to leave immediately. She begged again, tears streaming down her face, but I didn't waver. I opened the door and stood there until she walked out, clutching her bag. After she left, I locked every door and window in the house. Then I went upstairs to Maya's room. She was curled up on her bed with a stuffed rabbit, humming to herself. When she saw me, she smiled. "Is Sophie coming back tomorrow?" she asked. I hesitated. "No, honey. She won't be babysitting anymore." "Why not?" I tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "More time together." "Because Mommy decided it's better if we spend..." She nodded sleepily, satisfied with the answer. But my chest ached with the knowledge that she had trusted Sophie more than anyone outside our family. That trust had been broken. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't bring myself to hire another babysitter. Daniel suggested it a few times, but I always shook my head. The thought of letting another stranger into our home made my stomach twist. I arranged my schedule differently, worked from home when I could, and leaned on family for help. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way I felt safe. I kept the nanny cam footage saved on a flash drive, though I never looked at it again. Just knowing it existed was enough. Proof of what happens when you ignore your instincts. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the little moments I brushed off, the missing earrings, the whispers, the unease I couldn't explain. If I had trusted those feelings sooner, maybe I could have spared us weeks of betrayal. But I learned my lesson. and I never forgot it. Trust is precious, and once broken, it cannot easily be repaired. We often silence our instincts to avoid conflict or to appear reasonable, but those instincts exist for a reason. Blind trust, even in the people who seem kindest or most harmless, can invite danger into our homes. Always listen to your gut. Protect the ones who rely on you, and remember that trust must be earned, not assumed.